A month after Peach's death, things are actually going better than ever for Joe and Beck. And the mourning over Peach's death has actually brought the two closer than ever. Things are going so well, in fact, that Joe stopped looking at her old phone to see who was texting her. He hid it in his ceiling, and he hasn't looked at it in a while. But Beck's grades are starting to slip, and she just got fired from her yoga position. And Joe decides to give her a job at Mooney's bookstore. The problem is she sucks. She sucks so bad, Ethan actually has to come to Joe at one point and say she's showing up late, she doesn't know where to put things. I know it's awkward because she's your girlfriend, but you gotta say something to her. So right before he has to go have an uncomfortable conversation with Beck, he gets a phone call at Mooney's from the police department in Greenwich. And they're looking for Mr. Mooney, which Joe pretends that he is Mr. Mooney, and they're asking about that car. And Joe says, oh yeah, I lent it to my nephew, Spencer, which is the fake name that he gave the cops. So while it gets the cops off of his tail, it's a close call. But now he has to go have that uncomfortable conversation with Beck, and she says that she's still mourning the loss of Peach, and it's just very difficult on her. And the only good thing right now in her life is therapy. And Joe takes this as a slight, and Beck notices it. So she tries to set up a date night for the two in the basement of Mooney's. And during the date night, she once again brings up her therapist, and Joe is getting a little bit intimidated that she feels the need to go and talk to somebody that is not named Joe. Her birthday is also coming up, and Joe wants to know what she wants to do, and she says, let's keep it low-key this year. But the next day when he's talking to her friend Lynn, she says no girl wants a low-key event. They tell you that, and they want to be surprised with a big event. Every year, the guy that was dating Beck would try to do a low-key event, and then Peach would swoop in and save the day. So Lynn's idea is to throw a big surprise party at Mooney's, and everybody comes with their favorite literary character. Joe is hesitant to do so, but he reluctantly agrees. Lynn also admits that while nobody really liked Peach, they all loved Peach. So Peach was the definition of a queen bee. So we fast forward to the day of the party, and Joe is very stressed out because Beck is 40 minutes late. At one point, they think she's showing up, but it turns out to be just Blythe, who surprisingly hits it off with Ethan over their love of the same authors. But that's not helping out Joe, who is getting more and more stressed, wondering where Beck is. And to top it off, he's trying to get a hold of her, but he can't. And as he's complaining to Lynn about how selfish this is of her to show up late, he fails to notice that she is right behind him. And she is pissed. She takes him into the office and reams him out for throwing her a big surprise birthday party when all she wanted was something small and intimate. He tries to blame it on Lynn, but she doesn't take the bait. So since tensions are already high in this conversation, Joe decides to ask, well, where were you? Beck says, I had a therapy session and it ran late. And he says, well, why do you smell like you just drank 3 glasses of rosé? He says, I went to a bar to sit down and be with my thoughts. And then Joe asks, let me see your cell phone. And Beck pulls it out, but she says, if you look at this cell phone, then that means there's no trust in our relationship, and that means there's no us. And while Joe doesn't take the phone, Beck storms out of the place very pissed off. She shows up at Joe's apartment the next day to make amends, and at first things are back to the way they were, but then they slowly start deteriorating. She keeps getting these weird text messages, and Joe can't figure out who they're from. But since she's being kind of cagey, he decides to look at that old cell phone and sees that she's texting somebody with a fox emoji as their name, saying, let's meet in our old spot. So he starts to follow her. And while he's following her, he texts her, hey, what are you doing? And she stops and turns around. Although shortly after that, Joe loses her in the park because Beck is circled around and she's behind him and she's caught him. She asks, are you following me? And at first, Joe says no and plays it off, but it's clear to her that he's lying. He asks if she's sleeping with her therapist, but she adamantly denies. And then he says, well, then who are the text messages to? Who's the fox? And the fox is somebody she went to Brown University with who has the last name Fox that she's meeting. And it's also a girl. But this betrayal of trust is enough for her to end things with Joe. And since he is convinced that she's having an affair with her therapist, he schedules a therapy meeting with this therapist. Although he switches Beck to a guy and switches a bookstore to a bar. But he tells the therapist the entire story of how their relationship deteriorated. And in the middle of this therapy session, he steals a letter opener. And after the doctor leaves for the day, he breaks in using the letter opener and goes to his computer. He starts listening to the therapy sessions that the therapist recorded with Beck to see if there is actual infidelity going on. And during the latest therapy session with Beck, she's talking about how he was following her through the park. The therapist asks, if I'm Joe right now, what would you want to say to me? And she says, I never got to grieve, whether it be with Peach or my dad or Benji, and instead of putting it in my writing, I just hibernated with you. And I resent you for it. I need space to heal, and every time I turn around, there you are trying to make everything perfect again. But the reality is, only I can do that, and if you really love me, you'll see that, and you'll let me go. So Joe realizes 2 things. 1, they're not having an affair, and 2, he has to let her go. So he heads home and smashes up her old cell phone, and then heads to her apartment, where he apologizes and says, I'm giving you space, I'm letting you go, and walks away. And since the two aren't having an affair, he even decides to schedule another therapy session with that therapist. But he's a single man now, and he heads home, home and he's greeted by Claudia's sister, Karen. And their first interaction didn't go so hot because Karen was holding a baseball bat trying to fight Ron away from their house, and she was in a mood. Their second interaction went a lot better. It was right before Beck's surprise party, where she told Joe that Beck is lucky to have somebody in her life that cares. So when she finds out that Joe just got dumped, she takes it upon herself to take his mind off of things, and the two bang each other's brains out. And as Karen is taking a shower, Joe goes to check his cell phone, but he once again sees Candace, and Candace says, "Are you going to leave Beck alone, or is she going to end up like me?" Thank you for watching this recap. If you do not see the next one up in the corner right there on the end screen, don't worry, it'll be up shortly. Please consider following the channel. That'd be cool. If you liked the video, give it a thumbs up, and if you don't, there's a thumbs down button for a reason.